Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you love epic stories, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our adventures. Today, we're diving into the thrilling conclusion. Let's get started. The Obsidian Tower stood before them, a twisted monument of shadow piercing the bruised sky. Its dark walls seemed to drink the very light from the air. Zoya gazed up at its impossible height, her breath catching in her throat. "So this is the end," she whispered, the words heavy with a mix of dread and determination. Ayaan stood beside her, his hand resting on the hilt of his weathered blade. He shook his head, a flicker of defiance in his eyes, or the beginning of fixing everything. As if in response to his words, a low groan echoed from the tower. The colossal doors, carved with forgotten runes and screaming faces, swung inward on their own, revealing a chasm of absolute darkness within. A cold wind, smelling of dust and old despair, rushed out to greet them. They exchanged a look, a silent agreement passing between them. There was no turning back. Together, they stepped across the threshold, leaving the familiar world behind. The hall inside was vaster than seemed possible from the outside. The ceiling was lost in an abyss of shadows, and the floor stretched into an unsettling infinity. Strange, ephemeral shapes drifted through the air like captive. Ghosts and fractured beams of light pierced the gloom from unseen sources, illuminating dust motes dancing in the oppressive stillness. A voice, smooth as silk but cold as the grave, echoed from the darkness. "You came farther than I expected." From the deepest part of the hall, a figure began to coalesce. The Shadow King emerged, no longer a fleeting phantom but a solid, towering presence. His form was clearer, more defined, his eyes burning with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. Zoya's hand tightened into a fist, her knuckles white. "This ends today," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound courage in the cavernous space. The Shadow King let out a low, condescending chuckle that seemed to crawl under their skin. "Does it? You still don't understand, do you, little heroes?" He raised a long, slender hand, and the air around them shimmered. Images, ghostly and terrifying, filled the hall. They saw a world gripped by paranoia, people hiding in their homes, neighbors eyeing each other with suspicion, children crying in the dark. Fear was a palpable force, a suffocating blanket over everything. "I rule," the Shadow King explained, his voice dripping with sinister logic, "because fear already exists. I am not the cause. I am the consequence." Ayaan took a resolute step forward, his boots echoing on the unseen floor. His gaze was steady, unflinching. "Fear exists," he conceded, his voice clear and strong. "But so does choice. We choose not to be ruled by it." As if triggered by his words, the ancient marks on both his and Zoya's arms began to pulse with a brilliant, warm light, cutting through the oppressive gloom. The glow intensified, casting long, defiant shadows that danced away from them. The Shadow King recoiled slightly, his eyes narrowing at the unexpected radiance. "Those marks," he hissed, a flicker of something akin to surprise in his tone. "They were never meant for children." Zoya stepped up to stand beside Ayaan, her own light joining his. A small smile touched her lips. "Then maybe children were always meant to change things." With a roar of frustration, the Shadow King flung his arms wide. The shadows in the hall surged forward, a tidal wave of liquid darkness and whispering dread, converging on the two small figures of light. Instinctively, Ayaan and Zoya moved back to back, creating a small, defiant island of brilliance in the encroaching sea of despair. "Together," Ayaan said, his voice a firm anchor in the storm. "Together," Zoya echoed. An explosive burst of pure, unadulterated light erupted from them. It was not just bright. It was warm, filled with the memory of sunshine, the feeling of a friend's laughter, the comfort of home. The wave of shadows crashed against this barrier and instantly recoiled, sizzling and dissipating like mist in the morning sun. The entire hall was illuminated for a brief, stunning moment, revealing its true, crumbling architecture. Before darkness rushed back in, the Shadow King staggered, shielding his eyes, a pained grunt escaping his lips. Impossible. He rasped, his form flickering for the first time. Just then, another light began to bloom in the hall. It was a soft, gentle glow, but it held a power that felt older and deeper than even the Shadow King's darkness. It was a familiar light. From within its gentle radiance, a figure stepped forward. It was Rumi, but not the small, skittish creature they had known. He stood tall, his form composed of calm, steady light, his eyes holding the wisdom of 1,000 lifetimes. Zoya gasped, her heart lurching in her chest. Rumi. Rumi turned his head and offered them a serene, knowing smile. The light emanating from him was the very essence of peace. Every sacrifice, he said, his voice soft yet resonant, becomes hope. The Shadow King let out a final, desperate roar of fury and lunged, his shadowy claws extended, aiming to extinguish the new light. But as he moved, the gentle radiance from Rumi swelled, surrounding the king, enveloping him not in a painful fire, but in a tranquil, unyielding embrace. He struggled against it, but it was like fighting against the tide or the rising sun. Ayaan stood firm, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. You don't have power over us anymore. The Shadow King's form began to thin, to become transparent. The darkness that composed him started to unravel, drifting away like smoke. A final, spiteful whisper echoed through the hall. This world will fall again. Zoya looked at the fading tyrant, her fear completely gone, replaced by a quiet strength. Then we'll protect it again. With those final words, the shadows dissolved completely. The Obsidian Tower, its purpose now undone, began to crack. Fissures of pure light raced across its dark walls. With a final, silent groan, the entire structure crumbled, not into rubble and dust, but into motes of brilliant light that ascended into the sky. Above, the perpetual twilight broke, the clouds parted, and a clear, hopeful sky was revealed. Down below, the world of Choti Si Dunya, now free from the oppressive shadow, glowed brighter and more vibrant than ever before. Rumi, shining and whole, turned to Ayaan and Zoya. My task is complete, he said, his voice filled with a gentle finality. Ayaan looked from the transformed world back to their radiant friend. Are we going home? He asked, the question laced with a bittersweet mix of longing and regret. Rumi nodded. Yes, but you will always carry this world with you. It is a part of you now, just as you are a part of it. He raised a hand, and a doorway of swirling, golden light materialized before them, humming with a gentle energy. Zoya ran forward and through her arms around Rumi, hugging him tightly. The light was warm and solid. Thank you, she whispered into his radiant form. Rumi returned the embrace. No, he replied softly. Thank you for believing. With one last look at the beautiful, restored world of Choti Si Dunya, Zoya and Ayaan took each other's hand and stepped through the glowing door. There was a sensation of falling, and rising all at once, a rush of color and sound, and then stillness. They were back in the attic. Soft morning light streamed through the dusty window, illuminating the familiar clatter of old furniture and forgotten treasures. It was quiet, peaceful. Ayaan looked around, then down at his hands, as if expecting them to be different. Did that really happen? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Zoya didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her own arm. The intricate mark was still there, glowing with a soft, residual light, but even as she watched, it began to slowly fade, like a dying ember, until it was gone. She looked up at Ayaan, and a slow, certain smile spread across her face. Yes, she said, it did. They stood there in the morning light, a shared understanding passing between them. They smiled, outside the window. The world looked exactly the same. The birds were singing. A car drove down the street. The neighbor's dog was barking. But they knew they were not the same. And far away, in a tiny world held safe within a storybook, a single brilliant spark of light stood watch, a silent, eternal guardian. What an incredible finale! Thank you all so much for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us and helps us create more stories like this one. We'll see you in the next adventure.